Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Adventure and Mystery Book Club. I'm Bill Mallory, branch manager of the La Jolla Library, and all that good stuff. So glad you could join me for today's reading. Of course, today we are reading the conclusion of Whose Body, the first of the Lord Peter Wimsey books by Dorothy L. Sayers. Um, so, uh, and of course, when we are done, we will also talk about our next book, which we will start reading on Monday at 4 p.m. So just to recap briefly, we are in the middle of chapter 13, and chapter 13 is a confession of uh, the person who has become increasingly more and more of a suspect as the story has gone on, the doctor, Sir Julian Freak. And he is, Lord Peter Wimsey has kind of made the connection that he have doesn't really have a moral compass. Kind of what is I mean they didn't use that term, but that's kind of what's happening here, is that uh, he sort of gets a little thrill out of watching other people and their murders, and sort of seeing where they went wrong. And so in this confession, and the surrounding incident in this is that the police went to where he lived and caught him in the act of writing this confession. He was about to kill himself. He was about to do himself in, and then this confession was meant to sort of reveal what he had what he had done and what he had gone on to do. So it's very interesting, a little anticlimactic, I'm going to have to say, to sort of say, okay, you got me, I give up. But that's essentially what's going on here, at least in the beginning. And so we're sort of getting into Sir Julian Freak's mindset and what was important to him, which was that he so far anyway, what we have learned is that he wanted to get revenge uh, on Reuben Levy, because Levy married the woman that he loved, and he couldn't get her to marry him, so she married Levy instead. And apparently, according to what we have read so far, on Wednesday's reading, is he had basically been waiting for years, uh, just biding his time, waiting until there was a corpse that would come from the workhouse, one of the workhouses, and that bore a resemblance to Reuben Levy, and and that when the time would come, he would he would kill Levy and switch bodies, so that way the the he was in charge of and teaching classes in anatomy and dissection, and so they would in fact be dissecting Levy's body, whereas the other body would kind of, he said he wanted to put it in a place where there was no connection to him and no connection to Levy, and no connection to anyone, and so because that way they wouldn't get into any trouble, and so that's why he stuck the other body, the workhouse body, in Mr. Thip's bathtub. So this is what we know so far. Obviously, he seems to be a bit of a sociopath. I'm gonna throw that out there, and that he seems to certainly does not have any empathy towards this person, and even this workhouse fellow who had been hit on the neck by something heavy, and was in the process of dying. He mentions in the part that we read last time is that in order to make the timing right on this, he kind of helped the fellow along a little bit. So he didn't just wait for the guy to die. He assisted him. He sort of helped him in that process. So we are currently a little ways into chapter 13, the concluding chapter of Whose Body. And if using, oh yeah, and Peruvian oil shares figures into this as well. But that apparently was all just a blind to trap Levy into get him into come to the house as a possible investment. Excuse me. So we will continue chapter 13 of Whose Body by Dorothy L. Sayers. We parted after that, and I went round to the workhouse. My man had died about 11 o'clock. I had seen him just after breakfast and was not surprised. I completed the usual formalities with the workhouse authorities and arranged for his delivery at the hospital at about 7 o'clock. In the afternoon, as it was not one of my days to be in Harley Street, I looked up an old friend who lives close to Hyde Park and found that he was just off to Brighton on some business or other. I had tea with him and saw him off by the 5:35 from Victoria. On issuing from the barrier, it occurred to me to purchase an evening paper, and I thoughtlessly turned my steps to the bookstall. The usual crowds were rushing to catch suburban trains home, and on moving away, I found myself involved in a contrary stream of travelers coming up out of the underground or bolting from all sides for the 5:45 to Battersea Park and Wandsworth Common. I disengaged myself after some buffeting and went home in a taxi, and it was not till I was safely seated there that I discovered somebody's gold-rimmed pince-nez involved in the astrakhan collar of my overcoat. The time from 6:15 to 7 I spent concocting something to look like a bogus report for Sir Reuben. At 7 I went through to the hospital and found the workhouse van just delivering my subject at the side door. I had him taken straight up to the theater and told the attendant, William Watts, that I intended to work there that night. I told him I would prepare the body myself. The injection of a preservative would have been a most regrettable complication. I sent him about his business and then went home and had dinner. I told my man that I should be working in the hospital that evening, and that he should go to bed at 10:30 as usual, and I could not tell whether I should be late or not. He is used to my erratic ways. I only keep 2 servants in the Battersea house, the manservant and his wife, who cooks for me. The rougher domestic work is done by a charwoman who sleeps out. The servants' bedroom is at the top of the house, overlooking Prince of Wales Road. As soon as I had dined, I established myself in the hall with some papers. My man had cleared dinner by 8:15, and I told him to give me the siphon and Tantalus, and sent him downstairs. Levy rang the bell at 20 minutes past 9, and I opened the door to him myself. My man appeared at the other end of the hall, but I called to him that it was all right, and he went away. Levy wore an overcoat with evening dress, and carried an umbrella. "Why, how wet you are," I said. "How did you come?" "By bus," he said. "And the fool of a conductor forgot to put me down at the end of the road. It's pouring cats and dogs and pitch dark. I couldn't see where I was." I was glad he hadn't taken a taxi, but I had rather reckoned on his not doing so. "Your little economies will be the death of you one of these days," I said. I was right there, but I hadn't reckoned on their being the death of me as well. I say again, I could not have foreseen it. I sat him down by the fire and gave him a whiskey. He was in high spirits about some deal in Argentines, and he was bringing off the next day. We talked money for about a quarter of an hour, and then he said, "Well, how about this Peruvian mare's nest of yours?" "It's no mare's nest," I said. "Come and have a look at it." I took him upstairs into the library and switched on the center light and the reading lamp on the writing table. I gave him a chair at the table with his back to the fire and fetched the papers I had been faking out of the safe. He took them and began to read them, poking over them in his short-sighted way while I mended the fire. As soon as I saw his head in a favorable position, I struck him heavily with the poker, just over the fourth cervical. It was delicate work calculating the exact force necessary to kill him without breaking the skin, but my professional experience was useful to me. He gave a loud gasp and tumbled forward onto the table quite noiselessly. I put the poker back and examined him. His neck was broken, and he was quite dead. I carried him into my bedroom and undressed him. It was about 10 minutes to 10 when I had finished. I put him away under my bed, which had been turned down for the night, and cleared up the papers in the library. Then I went downstairs, took Levy's umbrella, and let myself out the hall door, shouting "Good night!" loudly enough to be heard in the basement if the servants should be listening. I walked briskly away down the street, went in by the hospital side door, and returned to the house noiselessly by way of the private passage. It would have been awkward if anybody had seen me then, but I leaned over the back stairs and heard the cook and her husband still talking in the kitchen. I slipped back into the hall, replaced the umbrella in the stand, cleared up my papers there, went up into the library, and rang the bell. When the man appeared, I told him to lock up everything except the private door to the hospital. I waited in the library until he had done so, and about 10:30 I heard both servants go up to bed. I waited a quarter of an hour longer and then went through to the dissecting room. I wheeled one of the stretcher tables through the passage to the house door, and then went to fetch Levy. It was a nuisance having to get him downstairs, but I had not liked to make away with him in any of the ground floor rooms, in case my servant should take a fancy to poke his head in during the few minutes that I was out of the house, or while locking up. Besides, that was a flea bite. To what I should have to do later. I put Levy on the table, wheeled him across to the hospital, and substituted him for my interesting pauper. I was sorry to have to abandon the idea of getting a look at the latter's brain, but I should not afford to incur suspicion. It was still rather early, so I knocked down a few minutes getting Levy ready for dissection. Then I put my pauper on the table and trundled him over to the house. It was now 11:05, and I thought I might conclude that the servants were in bed. I carried the body into my bedroom. He was rather heavy, but less so than Levy, and my Alpine experience had taught me how to handle bodies. It is as much a matter of knack as of strength, and I am in any case a powerful man for my height. I put the body into the bed, not that I expected anyone to look in during my absence, but if they should, they might just as well see me asleep in bed. I drew the clothes a little over his head, stripped and put on Levy's clothes, which were fortunately a little big for me everywhere, not forgetting to take his spectacles, watch, and other oddments. At a little before 11:30, I was in the road looking for a cab. People were just beginning to come home from the theater, and I easily secured one at the corner of Prince of Wales Road. I told the man to drive me to Hyde Park Corner, where I got out, tipped him well, and asked him to pick me up at the same place in an hour's time. He assented with an understanding grin, and I walked on up Park Lane. I had my own clothes with me in a suitcase and carried my own overcoat and Levy's umbrella. When I got to number 9A, there were lights in some of the top windows. I was very nearly too early, owing to the old man's having sent the servants to the theater. I waited about for a few minutes and heard it strike the quarter past midnight. The lights were extinguished shortly after, and I let myself in with Levy's key. It had been my original intention that when I thought over this plan of murder to let Levy disappear from the study or the dining room, leaving only a heap of clothes on the hearth rug. The accident of my having been able to secure Lady Levy's absence from London, however, made possible a solution more misleading, though less pleasantly fantastic. I turned on the hall light, hung up Levy's wet overcoat, and placed his umbrella in the stand. I walked up noisily and heavily to the bedroom and turned off the light by the duplicate switch on the landing. I knew the house well enough, of course. There was no chance of my running into the manservant. Old Levy was a simple old man who liked doing things for himself. He gave his valet little work and never required any attendance at night. In the bedroom, I took off Levy's gloves and put on a surgical pair so as to leave no telltale fingerprints. As I wished to convey the impression that Levy had gone to bed in the usual way, I simply went to bed. The surest and simplest method of making a thing appear to have been done is to do it. A bed that has been rumpled about with one's hands, for instance, never looks like a bed that has been slept in. I dared not use Levy's brush, of course, as my hair is not of his color, but I did everything else. I supposed that a thoughtful old man like Levy would put his boots handy for his valet, and I ought to have deduced that he would fold up his clothes. That was a mistake, but not an important one. Remembering that well thought out little work of Mr. Bentley's, I examined Levy's mouth for false teeth, but he had none. I did not forget, however, to wet his toothbrush. At 1 o'clock I got up and dressed in my own clothes by the light of my own pocket torch. I dared not turn on the bedroom lights, as there were light blinds to the windows. I put on my own boots and an old pair of galoshes outside the door. There was a thick Turkey carpet on the stairs and hall floor, and I was not afraid of leaving marks. I hesitated whether to chance the banging of the front door, but decided it would be safer to take the latchkey. It is now in the Thames. I dropped it over Battersea Bridge the next day. I slipped quietly down and listened for a few minutes with my ear to the letter-box. I heard a constable tramp past. As soon as his steps had died away in the distance, I stepped out and pulled the door gingerly to. It closed almost soundlessly, and I walked away to pick up my cab. I had an overcoat of much the same pattern as Levy's, and had taken the precaution to pack an opera hat in my suitcase. I hoped the man would not notice that I had no umbrella this time. Fortunately, the rain had diminished for the moment to a sort of drizzle, and if he noticed anything, he made no observation. I told him to stop at 50 Overstrand Mansions, and I paid him off there. I stood under the porch till he had driven away. Then I hurried round to my own side door and let myself in. It was about 1:45, and the harder part of my task still lay before me. My first step was to alter the appearance of my subject as to eliminate any immediate suggestion either of Levy or of the workhouse vagrant. A fairly superficial alteration was all I considered necessary, since there was not likely to be any hue and cry after the pauper. He was fairly accounted for, and his deputy was at hand to represent him. Nor, if Levy was after all traced to my house, would it be difficult to show that the body in evidence was, as a matter of fact, not his. A clean shave and a little hair oiling and manicuring seemed sufficient to suggest a distinct personality for my silent accomplice. His hands had been well washed in the hospital, and though calloused, were not grimy. I was not able to do the work as thoroughly as I should have liked, because time was getting on. I was not sure how long it would take for me to dispose of him, and, moreover, I feared the onset of rigor mortis, which would make my task more difficult. When I had him barbered to my satisfaction, I fetched a strong sheet and a couple of wide roller bandages and fastened him up carefully, padding him with cotton wool wherever the bandages might chafe or leave a bruise. Now came the really ticklish part of the business. I had already decided in my own mind that the only way of conveying him from the house was by the roof, to go through the garden at the back of this to go through the garden at the back in this soft, wet weather was to leave a ruinous trail behind us. To carry a dead man down a suburban street in the middle of the night seemed outside the range of practical politics. On the roof, on the other hand, the rain, which would have betrayed me on the ground, would stand my friend. To reach the roof, it was necessary to carry my burden to the top of the house, pass the servant's room, and hoist him out through the trapdoor in the box room roof. Had it merely been a question of going quietly up there myself, I should have had no fear of waking the servants, but to do so, burdened by a heavy body, was more difficult. It would be possible, provided that the man and his wife were soundly asleep. But if not, the lumbering tread on the narrow stair and the noise of opening the trap-door would be only too plainly audible. I tiptoed delicately up the stair and listened to their door. To my disgust, I heard the man giving a grunt and mutter something as he moved in his bed. I looked at my watch. My preparations had taken nearly an hour, first and last, and I dared not be too late on the roof. I determined to take a bold step and, as it were, bluff out an alibi. I went without precaution against noise into the bathroom, turned on the hot and cold water taps to the full, and pulled out the plug. My household has often had occasion to complain of my habit of using the bath at irregular night hours. Not only does the rush of water into the cistern disturb any sleepers on the Prince of Wales Road side of the house, but my cistern is afflicted with peculiarly loud gurglings and thumpings, while frequently the pipes emit a loud groaning sound. To my delight, on this particular occasion, the cistern was in excellent form, honking, whistling, and booming like a railway terminus. I gave the noise 5 minutes' start, and when I calculated that the sleepers would have finished cursing me and put their heads under their clothes to shut out the din, I reduced the flow of water to a small stream and left the bathroom, taking good care to leave the light burning and lock the door after me. Then I picked up my pauper and carried him upstairs as lightly as possible. The box room is a small attic on the side of the landing opposite to the servant's bedroom and the cistern room. It has a trap-door reached by a short wooden ladder. I set this up, hoisted up my pauper, and climbed up after him. The water was still racing into the cistern, which was making a noise as though it were trying to digest an iron chain, and with the reduced flow in the bathroom, the groaning of the pipes had risen almost to a hoot. I was not afraid of anybody hearing other noises. I pulled the ladder through on the roof after me. Between my house and the last house in Queen Caroline Mansions, there was a space of only a few feet. Indeed, when the mansions were put up, I believe there was some trouble about ancient lights. But I suppose the parties compromised somehow. Anyhow, my 7-foot ladder reached well across. I tied the body firmly to the ladder and pushed it over till the far end was resting on the parapet of the opposite house. Then I took a short run across the cistern room and the box room roof and landed easily on the other side, the parapet being happily both low and narrow. The rest was simple. I carried my pauper along the flat roofs, intending to leave him, like a hunchback in the story, on someone's staircase or down a chimney. I had got about halfway along when suddenly thought, why, this must be about little Thip's place. And I remembered his silly face and his silly chatter about vivisection. It occurred to me pleasantly how delightful it would be to deposit my parcel with him and see what he made of it. I lay down and peered over the parapet at the back. It was pitch dark and pouring with rain again by this time, and I risked using my torch. That was the only incautious thing I did, and the odds against being seen from the houses opposite were long enough. 1 second's flash showed me what I had hardly dared to hope, an open window just below me. I knew those flats well enough to be sure it was either the bathroom or the kitchen. I made a noose in a third bandage that I had brought with me and made it fast under the arms of the corpse. I twisted it into a double rope and secured the end to the iron stanchion of a chimney stack. Then I dangled our friend over. I went down. I went down after him myself with the aid of the drain pipe, and was soon hauling him in by Thip's bathroom window. By that time I had got a little conceited with myself, and spared a few minutes to lay him out prettily and make him ship shape. A sudden inspiration suggested that I should give him the pair of pince-nez, which I had happened to pick up at Victoria. I came across them in my pocket while I was looking for a penknife to loosen a knot, and I saw what distinction they would lend his appearance, besides making it more misleading. I fixed them on him, effaced all traces of my presence as far as possible, and departed as I had come, going easily up between the drain pipe and the rope. I walked quietly back, recrossed my crevasse, and carried in my ladder and sheet. My discreet accomplice greeted me with a reassuring gurgle and thump. I didn't make a sound on the stairs. Seeing that I had now been having a bath for about 3/4 of an hour, I turned the water off and enabled my deserving domestics to get a little sleep. I also felt it was time I had a little myself. First, however, I had to go over to the hospital and make all safe there. I took off Levy's head and started to open up the face. In 20 minutes his own wife would not have recognized him. I returned, leaving my wet galoshes and mackintosh by the garden door. My trousers I dried by the gas stove in my bedroom and brushed away all traces of mud and brick dust. My pauper's beard I burned in the library. I got a good 2 hours sleep from 5 to 7. When my man called me as usual, I apologized for having kept the water running so long and so late, and added that I thought it I would have the cistern seen to. I was interested to note that I was rather extra hungry at breakfast, showing that my night's work had caused a certain wear and tear of tissue. I went over afterwards to continue my dissection. During the morning, a peculiarly thick-headed police inspector came to inquire whether a body had escaped from the hospital. I had him brought to me where I was, and had the pleasure of showing him the work I was doing on Sir Reuben Levy's head. Afterwards, I went round with him to Thip's, and was able to satisfy myself that my pauper looked very convincing. As soon as the stock exchange opened, I telephoned my various brokers, and by exercising a little care, was able to sell out the greater part of my Peruvian stock on a rising market. Towards the end of the day, however, buyers became rather unsettled as a result of Levy's death, and in the end, I did not make more than a few hundreds by the transaction. Trusting I have now made clear to you any point which you may have found obscure, and with congratulations on the good fortune and perspicacity which have enabled you to defeat me. I remain, with kind remembrances to your mother, yours very truly, Julian Freak. Postscriptum. My will is made, leaving my money to St. Luke's Hospital, and bequeathing my body to the same institution for dissection. I feel sure that my brain will be of interest to the scientific world. As I shall die by my own hand, I imagine that there may be a little difficulty about this. Will you do me the favor, if you can, of seeing the persons concerned in the inquest and obtaining that the brain is not damaged by an unskillful practitioner at the post-mortem, and that the body is disposed of according to my wish. By the way, it may be of interest to you that I appreciated your motive in calling this afternoon. It conveyed a warning, and I am acting upon it in spite of the disastrous consequences to myself. I was pleased to realize that you had not underestimated my nerve and intelligence, and refused the injection. Had you submitted to it, you would, of course, never have reached home alive. No trace would have been left in your body of the injection, which consisted of a harmless preparation of strychnine mixed with an almost unknown poison for which there is at present no recognized test. A concentration solution of... At this point, the manuscript broke off. Well, that's all clear enough, said Parker. Isn't it queer, said Lord Peter, all that coolness, all those brains, and then he couldn't resist writing a confession to show how clever he was, even to keep his head out of the noose. And a very good thing for us, said Inspector Sugg, but Lord bless you, sir, these criminals are all alike. Freak's epitaph, said Parker, when the inspector had departed. What's next, Peter? I shall now give a dinner party, said Lord Peter, to Mr. John P. Milligan and his secretary, and to Messrs. Crimplesham and Wicks. I feel they deserve it, for not having murdered Levy. Well, don't forget the Thippses, said Mr. Parker. On no account, said Lord Peter, would I deprive myself of the pleasure of Mrs. Thipp's company. Bunter? My lord? The Napoleon brandy. And that, my friends, is the conclusion of Whose Body by Dorothy L. Sayers, the first of the Lord Peter Wimsey books. I hope you liked it. I thought it was very interesting. I had never read that story myself, or any of the Lord Peter Wimsey books, but as I understand, they are quite entertaining. And in some of my conversations I've had with people, I kind of mentioned that this first book in the series is actually the only one that is currently in public domain. So I can't really read any other ones in the series, but the first one was quite good, and so there we have it. That is our conclusion to Whose Body by Dorothy L. Sayers. Thank you very much for joining me on this 13-part, 13-chapter book. Well, again, a lot of them seem to be somewhat smaller in their writing, so we didn't have to go very far for that, and it was still a good tale. And Lord Peter Wimsey is certainly quite a character, along with Bunter, and hopefully we'll look forward to hearing more of their adventures in the future, as other titles fall into public domain in the years to come. So we are now at the point where we want to find out perhaps what we want to read for our next title, and I'm looking over to the side like this because I have another computer over here, and I am looking at the comments. Of course, at the beginning of the week, I placed a post and made a list of some potential stories that would fit our genre and be in public domain and be available at Project Gutenberg and downloadable for free, so everyone would have access to them. And in addition to hoping that other suggestions will manifest as well. And it looks like we have only gotten one response, and that is one comment in the votes, and that is requesting Princess of Mars by Edgar Rice Burroughs. This is the first of the John Carter Warlord of Mars books, that very popular series done by Edgar Rice Burroughs, of course, of Tarzan fame, and that this was another series, not quite as popular as Tarzan, but certainly uh, uh, very popular in its own right and a personal favorite of mine. And so, since that is our only comment, our only vote has been for that, we will read that. And I just happen to have a copy here. So on Monday at 4 p.m., I hope you can join me. We will start our brand new series on Princess of Mars, the first of the John Carter Warlord of Mars series. Like War of the Worlds, we are going back to Mars, and we'll see how it compares. If you haven't had a chance to read it, it's a good adventure story. It's way out there. I love the fact that there are it's so creative that he has just invented this whole alternate world that is just overflowing with the richness of his imagination. So I look forward to starting that with you on Monday at 4 p.m. Thank you very much. If you've been with me for the entire Whose Body reading, then kudos to you, and I hope you can join me for this next one. Thank you very much, folks. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you on Monday. Bye now.